All right, and we're live. All right, good evening. My name is Charlie Daly. I'm the co-author of my father, Chuck Daly's memoir, Make Peace or Die, A Life of Service, Leadership, and Nightmares. We're here tonight to talk about that book and my father's incredible life, and we are joined by Chris Matthews. Chris went to Holy Cross. He spent 15 years in politics as a presidential speechwriter, a senior aide to Tip O'Neill. He's had a long career in journalism, including hosting Hardball on MSNBC. And he has a new book coming out in May, This Country. All right, let's get started. Good evening, Chris.
Hi, Chuck. Chuck, I have to ask you this question because you inscribed the book to me. It's so nice to do it. Chris, you told me that someday I would have to talk. Well, here you are, the talking. So I'm going to ask you the question I ask a lot of people when I try to write books like yours. And it's your book is great. I'm telling you, most books you page ahead because it gets boring. Yours never gets boring. Every word, it's like when Pat Brown, the former governor of California, told me once about Jack Kennedy. I said, what was Jack Kennedy like? And he said, no bullshit. No bullshit. And that's what your book's about. So tell me, you're working in the West Wing of the White House. It's the new frontier, the 1960s, 61 to 63. And you bump into the president in the hallway or wherever. What was Jack Kennedy like when you bumped into him in the hallway?
In a hurry.
He was in a hurry.
Exactly. Always.
And I was amazed at the period in your book where you talk about Dick Donahue, your boss in congressional relations. And Dick Donahue was chewing out Jack Kennedy on the phone. I never thought Jack Kennedy was able to put up with people who worked for him chewing him out.
He didn't really chew me out. He just he was talking to another party, and he just said, okay, if that's what you want to do, do it. And I've forgotten the exact wording in the book, but clearly he was having a conversation, and they were getting nowhere, and he felt it's time to get off the phone.
Get off the phone with the president.
Right.
So you liked Jack Kennedy, right?
I did.
You didn't like Lyndon Johnson.
I felt saying didn't like him is understating the fact. I think he was a fraud, a would-be hero, unable to rationally think through his way through some of the problems he faced. And I know that he had a very difficult time being suddenly thrust into a job that turned out to be far too big for him.
Let me ask you about the Oval Office. You describe it in your book almost poetically, the day of November 22nd, 1963, when Kennedy was killed down in Dallas. And you talked about looking in the window of the Oval Office. What was that like?
It was empty and about to get worse. This persons came in there who had rarely been in there before. And it was sad and difficult and empty.
It reminded me of what somebody said about there's nothing as religious as an empty church.
I've rarely been to church, so I don't know how to explain that.
You might have been to an empty church.
Right.
You know, nobody
That's
ever,
pretty good.
My dad was in the Navy in World War II, and he was never out of he's an intelligence enlisted guy, and he never got out of Philly because that was a big naval base. And his brother went to Germany, he was a tank commander, and he's killing Germans and opening up camps. And his other brother was in Australia, married in Australia. He was a colonel in the Air Force, Air Corps. And I said to Dad, don't you wish you'd been overseas in the combat? Don't all your friends in the Knights of Columbus have great stories?
No.
And he said, nobody's ever told a story in the Knights of Columbus. Nobody from that war ever talked about it. Why is that?
Nobody's a big, expansive word. I think some people can't really say what's inside their guts, and they just don't want to spill it out. Others are not truthful.
So do you ever go to a movie and see a war movie and say, do you ever have one that says, this is what it was like?
I don't think so. I've seen some that are very unlike. For example, a TV series about MASH, which which had a theme talking a lot of fun inside a tent or a report for complete with nurses and happy endings, or at least not as blunt as the truth would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, he hated that show when growing up. And the one that sticks out from childhood, when Saving Private Ryan came out, I was way too young to watch it, but I sort of insisted on watching it with my dad. And that was a tough viewing. And I can remember that he found that to be realistic, at least in the technical side of showing what a rifle platoon is all about.
Chuck?
Well,
Saving
it's
Private Ryan.
better, but not the way it was. And I'm talking about just a Marine platoon leader in combat. I'm not talking about big pictures or big concepts. I'm just talking about my own little world as a platoon leader in the United States Marine Corps in a tough little war. And I think that people find any humor whatsoever in MASH. It just escapes me. And I just recall what it was like being carried in a stretcher and about to undergo meatball surgery, which is a stretcher put on the seahorses clothes horses where the stretchers will fit on that, and then there's a metal beside to table it. And there were a total of 6 of those pairs, and they started work. And it was unpleasant, first of all, waiting to get carried into the tent and join one of those 6. One person waiting with me just quietly died and didn't get in there at all. And when they're in there, they work fast, and a lot of other people want to get in there, waiting to get in. It's not something good for fun watching.
In your book, I kept trying to read between the lines, and what jumped out at me was let me get the right word, maybe not sympathy, but for the guys who were trying to kill you, the North Koreans and the Chinese, you have something like sympathy for them. It wasn't hatred. That didn't come through. What's your feeling now and then against the guys on the other side?
It's much more camaraderie there is now, not just because they're dead, but the idea that after a particular struggle I'm thinking of, I had afterwards, the next day, after or the records of the day, have to go find and what identification people have on their pockets. And I had just heard of the birth of my oldest son and my first son, and I found in his pocket a photograph of I assumed himself and a baby. And I found that somewhat difficult.
Yeah.
And then the problem is what just happened that got me feeling satisfaction of winning a firefight and then seeing what the consequences were, and the human consequences, even though they're dead now. I tried to explain it in the book that it's not, it's certainly not hatred, and it's also can be very cruel. I mean, we were slightly outnumbered temporarily, and so I told the 3 prisoners to take their clothes off, and figured them hanging there with their dicks hanging out wouldn't be a threat to us, rather than this one officer who on their side who tried apparently to rally the troops. And I think he realized he had to be shot. We had to shut him up. And McCloskey says, I pushed him off a cliff. I didn't push him. I just threatened him and he jumped. And no feeling of joy or satisfaction or, wow, we got this hill. Damn, but the hill.
And the day my father's describing, that's the day he was awarded the Silver Star for his actions. And in that chapter, we try to emphasize that none of what he just said is mentioned in the citation. Citation makes it sound heroic, makes it sound great, makes it sound important. And, you know, it's all of those things, but it was also horrible from his firsthand experience.
Well, I didn't know that citation at the time, for some time later, but that's why in the book we printed this glowing action on my part, and we printed that, and then right after that I tried to write just exactly what it was like. And to me, it wasn't any great glory. It wasn't, first of all, it was, among other things, it was a war crime because the other chaos there left one person over there very badly wounded, and clearly they told me he was dying, and that's probably true. And we had to shut him up because it was upsetting my troops, my soldiers, my Marines. So this young Marine said, Lieutenant, can I do him a favor? I said, go ahead and do it. That's shooting a prisoner, it's called. It's illegal. It's a criminal act. And I authorized it.
Guys, we have a pretty good question here. I'm just looking at some questions that are coming in. This is relevant. Did you have an opinion of General MacArthur? And if so, what was it? This is in the book. This person says, I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to read it, but I think it's worth sharing because this is a figure I think a lot of Americans and some South Koreans sort of worship. And you have a pretty strong opinion of that.
The only thing I worshipped about him was watching himself and worship himself. I thought he was a showboat. I thought he was, he once came out of our unit and described it as he visited while shells whistled overhead as if he was under fire. They are outgoing fire shells that we fired. So his nice Brady cap and all his crap. And then he also just carelessly and casually handed out a Silver Star to one of the battalion officers who happened to be there.
But tell him about the guy that put me in, coach, that guy in your platoon.
Yeah, he's impossible. This guy got busted 2 or 3 times for being a wise ass. And I told him, we got this stiff visiting here, and don't say a goddamn thing, and don't screw up. I hope he gets back out of there. So he visited his joining battalion, and
MacArthur did.
MacArthur did, and as MacArthur trundled up in his fancy garage, and Coley said, "Put me in, coach. I can run," because they had run away earlier.
MacArthur's army.
Yeah.
You know, Chuck, what comes through, again, between the lines is how much war brings out character. And there's some bad guys. You talk about that one guy that pushed the guy over in his own pee, basically, when he was wounded, the North Korean. Yeah. And you also talk about guys like Pete McCloskey. And tell us about what character comes out in a war, the good guys and the bad guys. Are there more good guys than the bad guys?
You mean on our side, or you mean just generally?
Side. The guys next to you, the guy alongside with you.
I'm not sure I understand. I mean, how good, some were very good indeed. Some were under great stress, just couldn't bear it. Some with generally very good. McCloskey's one of the best. I know that I made a mistake because we had a radio man who his radio was busted and so on. So McCloskey sensed that I was from his unit as we rotated back and forth, and sent his own radio man over. And the guy arrived and said, he's out of area, he's exhausted, climbing up a hill. He said, let me pause a minute. I said, I want to touch, give me the phone. And so he came and it's attached a wire to a pack on my back. And in a second, someone, probably a friendly fire, got a burst of machine gun fire and killed him, and killed the other one beside me, a guy, David Evans. And McCloskey still had he realized I was, when the situation changed, that I was somewhat disturbed. And he said, well, otherwise, he said, it really is a beautiful day. And he didn't mean that, but he was trying to calm me so that I didn't get all screwed up.
Yeah.
So I was very close to it.
In my experience, talking to the guys from his company, his platoon, who are still around, and getting to know some of their families through this project, the common denominator, and I would say this applies to my father as well, is there's a sense of, I guess, selflessness would be the closest thing I could think of, and just putting others first that seems to come across in everyone I talked to. I know, my dad, I've never heard him complain about his wounds once in my whole life. And it seems to be that way for the guys he was with.
Yeah, it's tough, I think, to anyone. And one day would be nice, and you could even laugh at bodies and so on. And another one, the whole thing is just too much. And there's 13 different endings that are on display in the Kennedy Library archives of last words of in a farewell to arms. And it was just, best I know, too. I just get discouraged as one can. And this guy, this woman who died in the end of Farewell to Arms, and one of the 13 endings is one I remember reading. Then he watched his wife died and walked out into the rain. And sometimes the rain doesn't seem to let up.
Yeah.
And one of the good things about this book, to me, I mean, if there are good things, is working with Charlie and making me see there's something beyond the rain. That there's some kindness. There's a lot of cruelty. Some of it is, as you pointed, some wounded person on his hip on the ground, trying to piss so he wouldn't piss on himself. And I saw a Marine just push him with a boot to sort of flip back on his back and pissed on himself. And I heard he was a truck driver who brought some supplies up, the person who applied the boot. And I heard the rack of a weapon, a bullet being racked into the chamber of his weapon. And I said, don't do it. Because that Marine was going to kill the guy who had pushed that boot. And that would have been a mess all around. So that's all irrational. And I don't know how to make much difference than that. There are other things that make a difference. I know when I was in that meatball surgery, and at that point, I'd given up on my arm. There's these 4 bones sticking out and so on, or 1 bone now, 4 then, 4 bone ends. And I said, at that time, I thought going home with no arm on that side would be too bad. So by then I had recovered. Later in the same day, early in the morning, had been shot. And first I told the corpsman to flip it off because there's no way. So he said, I don't know what he said. He said, I won't do that. And so I also talked to the guy, and the guy was very bloody in that tent with his 6 or 7 stretchers and the people in the meatball were cutting away. So after he finished me, might be to go to the other end of the tent and get further trading. He just took his hand and with his finger, he just touched my face as a gesture of kindness. He'd never spoken the whole time. And I had to turn my head away. I didn't want to see some Marine officer weeping in that tent. So we're getting more cheerful to talk about.
No, I thought, about the book, Chuck, for those of us who haven't been at war,
Good for you.
I always ask people who served in Vietnam, I always say the guys I beat, I say, were you in it? Meaning you didn't have a desk job in Saigon. You're out there, you're facing death every day. And they give you the same look. They look you and I know exactly what you mean. And they say, yeah. And I think there's something about your book to people like me is I love reading it because it was horribly true and I'm so tired of BS. I wanted to read something real. Your book referred to the scumbagization, some scumbag a faction of Washington. There's so much BS in the world and it's all written like movie scripts. It's written like it's romantic. Like it has a nice ending, a little conflict and then a happy ending. And your book's not like that. It doesn't have the arc of a drama. It doesn't have the arc of a story being told, but it has the evidence of truth.
I think that that's earned some respect from everyone. But in my situation, my mother's brother was killed at age 19 in France in World War I. My father's brother was age 19, killed in World War I. And there's a lot of blood around the family, not on your feet, but I know my mother had greeted the news of her brother, and he was killed in France in the Somme. She volunteered to go out as a VAD, a volunteer aid, nurse's aide. She had never left, although she's in good shape, but she never left West Cork before. And I doubt that she ever saw a open body, particularly one that was dying. So there's some grim things you got to get rid of, because once you overwhelm them, even in particular little things, like a finger on your hand, for Christ's sake, and it still bothers you, that means that I'm not well.
Yeah.
Now, let's go on to
And
serious subjects.
I guess I can speak to, like in my role as helping write these stories down, is because they're quite obviously extremely painful.
Let's talk about things in Washington.
We tried to capture, if you look at this book, about half of it concerns 6 months of my dad's early 20s when he was leading a rifle platoon. And I think that sort of speaks for itself, that those memories are in sort of high definition and everything else is almost in the black and white. But it's ultimately is a story of overcoming those things and finding a mission beyond that. Yeah, let's, so to your question about Washington,
We just come back.
we've got Mom over here with the cue cards.
What was that?
Scumbagification.
You were talking about Washington and how when you were there, you were there to basically serve.
Yeah. Well, I tried to be very enthusiastic about the long run that came to working in the west wing of the White House in a corner office, and everything seemed lovely. And it was very interesting and very challenging. And then that was up to November 22nd. But until then, I really did feel good about public service in Washington. I came from a family that despised the senior Kennedy because the old boy had seemed very sympathetic to the Germans in the interim years after World War I. And I learned, thanks to Stuart Udall, became Secretary of Interior, got me involved in the White House, and I found an extraordinary person and a man of great honor, unlike some earlier players. But I never called the old Kennedy a scumbag.
No,
You did not.
No. You're talking about after your days in Washington and how things changed.
Well, there were a few weaving spiders who only wanted to move ever upwards, who once they took a job, started looking for the next step, falling somewhat short of the job they ought to be doing. And they made it interesting. It's not all that surprising, but it's just hustling too much of themselves. So then as things went on, some persons left. We were making $13,000 a year in the White House, which was fine. And I had my family, and then Dick Donahue, who was an extraordinary person, also in the congressional liaison in the White House. And he finally left just before, by coincidence, just before November 22nd, because Nancy, who probably never, I won't say she never missed a period, but they had 11 kids, and they required a certain amount of money. And en route to that, they decided to go back and make a living in Lowell, Massachusetts. And he had worked as a volunteer for Kennedy from the very early days of Kennedy. He's qualified to hang up on the president. Not many are. And he was remarkable person.
I think the point too is that, these people public service was a part of their lives, but it wasn't some professional political class who were then going to use this as a stopgap and then eventually go on to lobbying and consulting and whatever.
That's right. I think that they, at our level, which is just fortunate, but there are a huge level of persons all through government who worked hard and very strongly and day and night. And I remember one point when Donahue was there, when the president wanted to see him before Donahue left to go back to Lowell. And so he asked him to come in. He asked to be brought in. So all these wonderful children and Nancy were there. And Dick went and picked up the youngest one, Philip maybe, I've forgotten. But, and the baby started crying, and the president says, Dick, hand her back to her mother. She's so seldom seen you that the strangers of that guy frightened him. So they went, and a lot of persons were very, very hard workers. And there is that one, I think it was O'Donnell or someone who dedicated his book to the wives. And I know that they sometimes felt they were barely known. And Christine and others experienced some of that.
Mary, your first wife.
Yeah.
That was, and the book he's talking.
I'm going gaga. I've got two.
The book he's referring to is Johnny, We Hardly Knew You by Kenny O'Donnell and Dave Powers. And it's To Our Wives for Their Many Sacrifices.
I think the best line in it was from, there's so many good lines in this book, Chuck, but memorable. But one was, people don't read memoirs to learn about the author. They read them to learn about themselves. That's a pretty profound statement because,
Unfortunately, I think it is, because some of what you learn about yourself isn't all that attractive.
well, the other thing that is attractive is your commitment and what you do for your country lately.
Right.
That's a pretty good standard.
And that came from David Shoup, who's a commandant of the Marine Corps, who had won the Congressional Medal at Iwo Jima. And when I ran into him for the first time in the White House, and I said, I'm the only Marine on the president's immediate staff in the White House. And he had these cold eyes, and he's a little guy. And he said, good, what have you done for your country lately? And he tried to express that he had an immense sense of duty that didn't stop with one way station or one comment. He was a beauty, and he never swore or anything like that. He was a very quiet man. I saw him after, and he was quite religious. And I asked him, how you doing? And he said, Chuck, he said, I believe in God, but this time I think he's got a little fucked up, talking about the president's death.
When you think about the guys who didn't come back and who gave their todays so that other people would have their tomorrows, and do you think of them as one?
I can recite a lot of them. I can cite, there's a little memorial for I forgot exactly how many, 15 or so in Quantico, Virginia, a little stone cross, and it was to the memory of the persons who went to the first special basis class to earn their commissions, and it listed some of them who didn't come back, and there was one of them who's dead now, who we have a memorial. We had a comments about some of those persons, and one, Angus Deming, one of those memorials, just stood up, and it's in a church. We don't go to church. I didn't go if you want to, but I mean, it's just where this reunion was, and he ran down the name of every single person who didn't come back, and something about each one of them, something personal about them. And it's just so that's an easy way to say it's remembered, and I don't know how to say it otherwise, other than it's the idea that someone did indeed give up individually or collectively, that and it's used elsewhere in the world now, but we gave we gave ourselves for your tomorrows. By implication, it means don't just sit on your dead ass and don't do anything with our tomorrows.
Yeah, and we kept some of their names on our desk where we were spreading out the papers that became this book while we were writing. I mean, and I tried to be aware of what I owe them, considering that I'm only here because of some people who made it possible for my dad to come home.
I think,
I think, and we all owe that to them. I don't think that's specific to military families or,
You think that's the way they felt? The person who killed them, their widows feel about it?
So we have.
can I just bring one, Charlie? Because Chuck's something in it. It was more, the wars weren't fought for no reason. And war is all what it is. It could be absurdly whatever, but you talked about the North Koreans. And when I watch television and I watch the Korean army from Pyongyang marching along in that regimental way where everybody's face has the same expression, everybody's scared to death that they're going to get in trouble because they don't have the same look as the guy next to them. And you said that could be all of Korea today if you guys hadn't fought.
Well, I don't know. All I know is that I don't know a lot of things, but there's a guy on the faculty somewhere in Virginia wrote a book, The Voices of the Korean War, and he had interviewed. This was published very few years ago. The voices of the persons who sent their troops into these dark, hopeless attacks, mass efforts, where, you know, if we get interlocking bands of grazing machine gun fire, you pile up a lot of bodies. And they wrote something, what they had sent into that fire, those who survived, or those who were so executive they didn't have to survive, they just sent people. But it's interesting. And I thought it was very sensitive, the voices from the Korean War, but I got a copy somewhere and copied them. So once in a while I read that.
We've got an interesting question here that's back to the White House.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to know if you've been back to the West Wing since you worked there.
I decided not to for a long time. And then I was persuaded to go in the Clinton years. And it was all right. My spacious office was quite crowded. The staffs are much bigger. Was that the only time I went there? I felt that the quality of at least one of the persons I met was attractive enough, but it seemed to me that her chief qualification was, well, that's not it. I shouldn't say it.
I was
Christine
about to
says,
say
"Don't
some
it."
canceled stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. The chief qualification was.
No,
we're
we're
good.
good.
All
So
right.
we've got another another question about the book. Somebody asked, do you consider this an anti-war book?
I consider it is one that, to the best of my abilities, tells the absolute blunt truth about war. And that if we knew a little more about that, when there's just reason for war, and I consider, say, the Nazis in the infantry, I guess the things that, if the bugle blows, I would answer it. If the bugle blew by the present occupant of the called me to go to war, I'd tell him to go fuck himself.
There was something that the photographer James Noctway said that an honest war photograph is almost by definition going to be an anti-war photograph, and I think we had that in mind in the tone of this book. We definitely weren't trying to push any particular opinion about war one way or another, but we were trying to talk about what one person's experience of war was like.
Yeah, I can jump that to things like what government is like and can lead you into terrible situations. The lying about, say, I don't know, Tonkin Gulf, or the conduct of South African leaders who worshipped the words of Robert Kennedy and Mandela when he got out of 28 years, and they said very good things. Then they tolerated government such as there is now in South Africa, which has real trouble with honesty, has just a decade or so hostility toward science as related to the whole thing of syphilitic conduct.
We've got another good
We got
question here.
Northern Ireland is another one that Christine pointed out to me.
We
Do I consider?
I want to bring it back to DC. We have another
Okay.
question there.
Good.
What did you think of Tip O'Neill? And someone asks, was he? Did you think he was a successful, effective speaker?
Tip was, I think, highly effective, and he couldn't stomach the attacks and the degeneration conduct within the House. But I think he was very good indeed. And as you know, Christine, your mother was a top aide there, and she did some very good. They did very good things in the Congress and also outside it. Christine led the first group to go into Cambodia of congressmen and congresswomen to see what the world is like. That's a poor answer for it. I think he was terrific, and I think he was realistic about what politics can do, and to his best ability did it. He did a lot toward Title IX, which is the fairness of all of person, not just men, but how the law applies. They might even want to have college sports where women got some facilities, such as bathrooms, and otherwise, by law, were treated equally. There was that part. The other parts, a whole range of things that Tip led, and God, he was some piece of work. And, we won't see him anytime now. We hope that we have one growing into that job. It has grown. I think she has grown onto it. All right, Christine, what do you think we should do? She sits there and groans. Jesus, why didn't you think more about what went on in South Africa and how you raised hell down there about what was done? Or why didn't we?
Yeah, we actually have a question about that. So. Yeah, Chris, have you?
Yeah, I was amazed you had gone to that shack town, this terrible place in South Africa outside of Cape Town. I remember driving. It had an African name. I think in the old day it was called Crossroads because I was there with the black delegation, the American African American congressional delegation. It was terrible then. It was terrible when you got there. And then you had Thabo Mbeki, that leader that came in after Mandela, who was hopeless, who thought that AIDS wasn't AIDS. And yeah, I think you wrote really well about that in the book, the failure of a leader to just confront reality. And his people lost 300,000 people because of this guy's stupidity.
Well, that was Kalecha, was the place you're talking about between the airport and Cape Town. Cape Town being one of the beautiful places in the world, and Kalecha being one of the worst. And I just got involved with a clinic there by a single person from the Doctors Without Frontiers, and he's been there. He's there now. And he did all kinds of promotions. He wasn't interested in that. He was running a clinic to give these people hope. And then when
and to give a little bit of context, this is like the year 2000 roughly, and you had a denialist government in South Africa where they were basically saying that they didn't have an AIDS epidemic, that it wasn't a problem, and they certainly didn't need any kind of drugs to help combat AIDS and the result was a lot of death.
Homemade hospital, medical stuff that had nothing to do with the curing or controlling of AIDS. And then he had volunteers around that place. And when they went out, it was a dangerous place. And I knew some of the persons there. There's one woman, Lorna Mafone.
Lorna Mafone.
So there aren't any flush toilets. There are only between 100 and 200,000 persons there. But they were dangerous for young persons or any person to go to a toilet at night, anytime but at night. And she was raped and murdered. And the conclusion was to that, she after she was murdered, some of the other volunteers put on little T-shirts saying, "I am HIV positive," and they wanted to kill me too. And so I could hardly read what they left there once. It was just this, oh God, the flowers go in heaven, pick a bunch and put it in her arms and tell her it's from the volunteers at Kalecha.
And I think that this chapter in my dad's life, I mean, he was in his 70s when he was in South Africa doing field work. I think he was just overwhelmed by not only the devastation he saw there, but the courage of people like Lorna Mafalne and Dr. Eric Gomer, who ran that MSF clinic, who, in the face of death and disease and all of that, they decided they were going to do whatever they could to stand up to that. And in her case, it was volunteering at an AIDS clinic as an AIDS patient. And I think there was something about that resonated with my father very deeply. You know, I think as you can see here, is every bit as difficult as the things he saw in war.
Yeah.
And
Let me ask you, Charlie, about, you put together the book, a lot of good editing, and you really sort of showcased on 3 parts of your dad's life. You're really limited to the Korean War experience, the New Frontier experience, a little bit on the Kennedy Library, and then a really explosive part at the end, the last battle. What did you leave out?
well, yeah, I mean, my dad's a great writer. He went to Columbia School of Journalism. He doesn't need my help
It took 9 months.
to write his story. And my role really was as an editor and as helping create a structure and a narrative to turn his stories into a book. And we obviously had to cut a lot. I mean, he's also been the vice president of Harvard. He's also been the vice president of the University of Chicago. There's very little in here about any of those things. He ran the Joyce Foundation, which is a $1 billion grant-making institution that he helped grow to that point. And he was on a board there with some pretty impressive people.
Wait a minute, Charlie, I want to interrupt you. It's not fair. It's not fair what you're saying about yourself.
Well, hang on.
Wait a minute. The fact is, you did more than 1,000 pages of interviews.
Yes.
In great depth, finding these persons, finding, for example, a widow in.
But
he cared for that person since 1951. When I was there, he's carried it on. And he last week carried on helping her in bad health now, and she was a widow of someone I served with.
So I think I want to read a little excerpt from the book that I think summarizes how we decided what got cut and what stayed, because ultimately we figured the theme of this book really, and it's pretty simple, is what it's like to go to war and what it's like to come home. And, you know, coming home for my dad was very interesting. It included time in the White House and lunch with Nelson Mandela and a lot of other things. But ultimately it keeps coming back to that, what can I do for my country now? So I'll just read this section. When my youngest son, Kevin, was considering joining the Marine Corps, he asked my friend, General Mike Leonard, for advice. Mike told Kevin, the Corps will teach you how to kill, but they cannot teach you how to get over killing. I stayed out of the conversation because I didn't want to influence Kevin's decision one way or another, but I wouldn't want my son or anyone's son to go to war without some idea of what it's really like. By sharing my story, I hope I communicate a sense of what it's like to go to war and what it's like to live with undying memories. In these pages, you can see the disproportionate impact of less than 6 months of combat in a long, full life. Writing a memoir, I became the editor of my own life story. Some of what I left out includes the riots in Chicago, my time as Harvard's vice president, and my work at the Joyce Foundation in Chicago. Those chapters of my life were interesting, to put it mildly. I'm as proud of my service on various boards as I am of anything else I've done. But when it comes to telling my life story in a way that might help and inspire others, I've chosen to focus on the war and my time in public service. I have a feeling that someone eager to run Harvard or sit on an influential board doesn't need my story to motivate them. But I just might be able to help someone who's coming out of Walter Reed, maimed inside and out, and wondering what he or she can make of themselves with 40% disability and a head full of painful memories and damaged hopes.
It was worth it.
I think you did that. I think you did that, Chuck. And I think you've done this for the country too. And I think since I don't know how many war movies I've seen, I've never seen one about the wars. Apparently, they're all glossied up, dramatized, made better with nice endings. And I do think there's something that made me feel good about reading this, maybe because it was so true and real and personal, mainly real. And I recommend everybody who hasn't read this book to sit it, go through word by word. Don't just listen to this conversation. And I start so many books and don't finish so many books. I went to every word of this book. And I think you and Charlie saved us a lot of time by making sure there's no padding in the book. There wasn't any padding. Most books are filled with padding. You just jump ahead a couple pages. And I thought everything was raw bone, real bone. Thank you. So Charlie, I guess we got some more questions, huh?
Yeah, it looks like it.
I'd like to interject one thing to Chris. Chris, I've read your books, and the one that touched me was your Jack, and it's a simple, direct biography of Kennedy, and it was a great job, very well done.
Dad, your son Kevin has a question. He asks, you've heard from some recent veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. How have they connected with your story?
Well, I think that we connected. I connected with them too. I was asked to talk at a community college, a very good one, on the Cape, and primarily veterans, and they were interested in going beyond what they have done. They'd served primarily not in war, or not in as vulgar as this one was described, but they did want to know what was interesting to do with their lives and thoughts they might have, and the idea of where to study. I thought it was a great exchange. I don't know what they thought.
You have another question, and Chris, I think you talked about this. I've heard you talk about this, I believe. How did President Kennedy's assassination affect Kenny O'Donnell personally?
That's a tough one. I think it affected him deeply, and he just he served out his time as well as he could. He was a tough guy and a very good one, but when soon after Johnson went into office, he had an all-staff meeting of the whole West Coast, the whole White House staff, and he looked around her and he said, "This is the new president of the United States." He said, "Where's was it Larry O'Donnell?"
No, yeah. Where's Ken O'Donnell?
Yeah, where's Ken O'Donnell? And cold as ice, Larry O'Brien said he went to a meeting, and that's where Kenny only had one president, and he wasn't disloyal to the other one in the brief time he was there, but he was like others. Mayor Daly, for example, always referred to the president when, even though the president was dead, and if you wanted something from Chicago, if it was reasonable, he'd probably be helpful, but he'd always say, "Well, I think the president would be pleased with this." The president was long dead at that point, but it's just that sort of thing made it for Kenny to really do something other than and get out of there and be a happy day when Day leaves. And, I think that he was a lost soul. He just beyond the loss of Kennedy, he just couldn't operate. It had been his whole ball game, and he really, really played it well. But so it goes.
And in that photograph that we have in the book, there's some. It's not all words. There's some great pictures in here, but one of the toughest pictures. There's a famous photo. I don't know if you can see it here, but it's on the Capitol steps. That's my father in the background. But Ken O'Donnell is the guy with black hair in the foreground.
Yeah.
Everybody else is looking at the first family on the steps, except Ken O'Donnell. He's looking up the steps at the box containing the president. We have another question. Somebody here wants to know, given your ability to look back on your life and the service and the tragedy, what would be your advice on how to carry on, and what can we do for our country now?
I think you probably can best answer yourself. We look at now as the key, how much gratitude you have being a citizen, even in these difficult times, but a citizen of a remarkable country, and you can do more. In the most elementary, obviously, is voting, but the other things, what do you do? What do you do with your life lately, like a month ago, or what harm have you done that wasn't necessary? I think everyone has to answer themselves, but the simple question you just asked that question shows an interesting being in some part of what we're doing now. And I think you can watch some of Chris's coverage and what he covers and what he doesn't cover and what he says and what he informs people of. But I think it's within the by now. I don't know how old you are. If you're over, say, 7 or 8, and up in second childhood as I am, there's usually something you can do every day, or at least try, or at least regret the fact that you didn't do it, and try it again tomorrow. Boy, I sound like a real Christer.
No, it sounds good.
Charlie, you sound good. I love you so much, and you've done a lot for me to face the truth inside me. And when I literally was unable to do that. I'm supposed to be a hard nose and so on. No, I'm not. Charlie and Christine have made a very, very happy part of this life. And when I think of that, and I think of all of my family, that it's not a bad way station. I wouldn't mind sticking around for a couple more years.
Hopefully.
Within reason. Geez, I talked to her enough.
We just got a lot of thank yous now in the chat. This has been, thank you everyone for tuning in. Chris, thank you so much for having us.
So.
Good work, guys.
This is a really special evening.
I'm looking for your book.
Chuck, I don't think it can match yours. And I think there's something here. What's the story about the Irish anyway? What's the Irish story? What is it that makes the Irish, Chuck? There's something there. I've all my life felt comfort when I'm with Irish guys. And I know it's not fair to say it. It's tribalistic. I know you're not supposed to be tribalistic. I know all that. And yet I have this warmth I got among the crowd. And the Irish Americans, really, it's not Irish especially, it's the Irish Americans. What's it about the Irish Americans, Chuck, as a last thought? What is it about people like you?
I would say despite me, because most Irish are interested in religion. Most Irish are well, they're not some Mick who came over and didn't like the Irish flying a flag at a speech of the Ireland Fund when they won't recognize the fact that there's a substantial number of Irish up in Northern Ireland, and they're pretty good if you get cute, because I was on a board of the American Ireland Fund, and I said, I see that flag up there on the side of the stage every time we have one of these meetings. You have the U.S. flag, and you have the tricolor of the Southern Ireland. And what about these other guys? What about the percentage of Ireland that lives in the north that is reasonable and is? How about let's say I move that we have a flag added to any time we would flag a flag at those speeches, other than the American flag. We can fly the Irish flag, and we can fly the Union Jack. So they're very thoughtful. For example, they said, okay, we won't fly the flags except for the American one, and going on peacefully, reasonably peacefully.
There's a chapter about the Troubles and my dad coming back to Ireland and the American Ireland Fund, the early days of that. And we use a very brief footnote. It's probably 5 sentences to describe the Troubles, to put some context there. Not everybody knows that there's a war going on in Northern Ireland as recently as the late 90s. And we wanted to just summarize it as briefly as we could. Well, this was like a 2-day process writing this footnote, because our inability to agree on how to summarize the conflict became like a microcosm of the conflict itself. And, as my mom was there when we were editing it, and she's like, this is why the Good Friday Agreement took as long as it did. Because even saying Northern Ireland is a loaded term, and not everybody calls it that. And so it was interesting how that spilled over even into writing about it in a book.
In the 1916 rebellion and so on, and the fighting for Irish freedom, I did mention in one of our general meetings of quite a large number of meetings, quite a large number there, and I said, that's great. I said, now we're going to celebrate this, and there were a handful of Irish killed on May 16th. And on the same day, in the Battle of the Somme, something like 20,000 Irish were killed who served on English regiments. So I don't feel very good about this day.
Yeah. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry to get so complicated on this crap.
No, it's great.
I think we have one person who wants to say a quick hello, Chris, before we sign off, and she was our editor. Mom, if you want to just hop over here.
Oh, okay.
You'll echo if you're. Turn that off.
Sorry.
Hold on. Our editor is about to join us.
I'm not sure I was the editor, maybe the referee might be a better word, but Chris, that was fabulous. I mean, clearly you read that book and just touched Chuck's soul. It was very emotional. I was like shaking all over. It was at times hard to listen to. And the one thing I'd say about the book that didn't come out in all the emotion is it's really funny. Chuck's got a great sense of humor, and there are a lot of really funny stories in there. And unfortunately, when you start talking about war, as Chuck said, it's not so funny. And some of the things in the White House, the assassination, such again, tragedy and despair and true sadness. But I think it was a great conversation, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. And for those of you who don't know, Chris is an old colleague of mine. We go back to 1980. Before Chris was a big shot on hardball and such, and everyone in the world knows Chris. So thank you very much for doing this. You
Christine, thank you. It was an honor, and I mean that. I love the book. I think everybody should read it and underline it. I'm an underliner. I guess you are too. Everybody's an underliner. And I underline so much. And I can't understand how a book about such horror and loss made me feel good, because it was true. And we all need truth. And Chuck, you said something in the book that sized it all up. You said, instead of wanting to go back and join the guys we lost, I want the guys we lost to come back to us.
Maybe in our spirits, not religious spirit, just inside us. If we do indeed owe those persons a try by ourselves to do as well as we can, whatever that doable within reason.
Thank you.
And I noticed when you were carrying on, there was one comment by Pete McCloskey out there in California, and he said he has never seen Chuck Daly talk for so long without using the F word. So again, another triumph in this evening's conversation.
His problem is as old as I am, and he's fucking deaf.
We love Pete McCloskey in our family too. Kathy worked for him, so that's how Kathy came to Washington, with Pete McCloskey. So
Yeah.
great man. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Paul. You're a great editor.
Chris,
Thank you, guys.
Great author. Thank you, sir.
take it easy.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Good night.